Hi everyone, welcome to Experiments in Poetry, episode 15. This is your host, Wendy. Today we will be talking about the American writer Howard Phillips Lovecraft. So H.P. Lovecraft, here we go. So it's really surprising that I have never picked up on the work of H.P. Lovecraft in the past. When I was a young kid, I was never exposed to it, and I didn't really take much English or literature classes when I was in universities because I was a science major. I have seen like his books in bookstores, but I just never gravitated towards it. So this is my first look into the world of H.P. Lovecraft. Now, he is pretty well known in science fiction and fantasy writing for creating rich fantasy worlds. I kind of liken it to, and I could be wrong, and I know people are really passionate. Again, this is my first time getting into the world of H.P. Lovecraft, but I kind of liken it to Tolkien and in the richness of the worlds that he created, or even so. He has several series that he has a couple series, the Dream Cycle series of short stories, and also the Cthulhu Mythos series. And from these series, there are several stories, short novels, and I hear even video games that are quite popular that are based on his novels. Now, I'm not a gamer, so I've never played any of these before, but if you are a fan of them, you can comment below and inform me about it, or you can always write me at wendy@experimentsinpoetry.com. I am always willing to learn more and get exposure to new and different things. So it's kind of interesting because H.P. Lovecraft is well known for his short story writing, but he's not so much well known for his poetry. And it's very interesting to me that I decided to randomly choose one of his works and choose a poem to cover. And the reason why I did that was because I like science fiction. I have seen kind of imagery that was coming out and was exposed to that and knew he had something to do with horror and kind of goth terror writing. And since it's Halloween time and I did my Mary Shelley kind of inspired poem that I would carry on during spooky season to cover other poets who have dabbled in the genre of sci-fi, goth, horror poetry. And certainly H.P. Lovecraft is known to be a master of horror writing and science fiction writing. So I definitely was curious to see what his writing looked like and what he was all about. Titled on the poem Nemesis, just simply because it looked kind of, like a terrible tale to be told. And it drawn me to it, the title. So this poem was published in 1918. And I wanted to say that when I was researching him, that I settled upon him because of our commonality in our interest in science and science fiction writing and horror writing and poetry. So we kind of seemed like a kindred spirit of sort. Another interesting piece about Lovecraft and the worlds that he created was that when people do analysis of the timeline of the poems that he wrote and the stories that he created and the novels that followed, that it seemed to be, for the most part, that he would first kind of play with his ideas in a poem or a poetry format, and then work into a short story, and then work into a novel. That seemed to be the progression of how he wrote things. And so here we go. Nemesis by H.P. Lovecraft. Through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber, past the wan-mooned abysses of night, I have lived o'er my lives without number. I have sounded all things with my sight, and I struggle and shriek ere the day break, being given to madness with fright. So he opens and closes his poem with this same stanza. The stanza is 5 sentences long. He is writing a classic, traditional, poetic format. It has so when I say it's classic or traditional, what I mean is that it has a meter and it's rhymed. So he is using a trimeter of an anapest. So an anapest is unstressed, stressed through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber. I have lived o'er my life without numb. So everything is having that kind of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, where that 3 is held out longer. And if I haven't said so already, there's a rhyming scheme. It's an A, B, B. And it seems like his last line, his 5th line, is twice as long, as far as the number of meters that he has in there, or feet. I'm sorry. Number of feet he has in there. He has 6 feet. And the top 4 lines each have 3 feet. So those are the just like a painter might say, I want to use oils, or I'm going to use acrylics, or I'm going to use canvas versus this medium over here, or whatever it is. It's just tools in the toolbox. And yeah, maybe somebody likes their oils and would never use acrylics, or, they don't like watercolor paintings. That's fine. But for me, I like to dabble in all sorts of ways. In one of my earlier episodes, I talked about the Sapphic meter and how that was a very specific rhythm. I've never written anything using a Sapphic meter, and apparently it's quite difficult to do because it's something that fit very well the ancient Greek language, but is really hard to do in English. However, I think maybe by the end of this season, or maybe in next season, I am going to write a Sapphic meter, just because I want to try to do it and see if I can get something out of it that sounds good and different for me. And it's just a writing challenge for me. I just like to do it, and it's a tool in the toolbox. And that's how I feel about that. I feel like whatever way you want to express yourself, go for it. I think that people try to say that when you rhyme and meter, it sounds childish. And I think I was reading some reviews of this poem, and I checked like the top journal in American in American poetry. And when I looked for H.P. Lovecraft to see what they had to say about him, they didn't even acknowledge him as a poet. He was not even in there, which I found really shocking, because he's a very, very famous writer, and he's you can't even find that he exists, which I think is odd. And so we're still sorry, I'm going on and on about his style, but I think it's important because it really bothers me when people put down this style. I'm going to go ahead and read a few more stanzas so you can see what I'm talking about when I say skilled writing. So the next stanza is, I have whirled with the earth at the dawning, when the sky was a vaporous flame. I have seen the dark universe yawning, where the black planets roll without aim, where they roll in their horror unheeded, without knowledge or luster or name. I have drifted o'er seas without ending, under sinister gray-clouded skies, that the many-forked lightning is rending, that resound with hysterical cries, with the moans of invisible demons that out of the green waters rise. So to me, it doesn't sound childish or sing-songy. It just flows off the tongue very well. I like the rhythm and the cadence to it. Nothing seems forced. It does seem like kind of like prose to me. Like the sentences are well thought out and all have punctuations. And I mean, it's really hard because to have that exact rhythm. I mean, he does use a few contractions, and I think that a lot of the modern poets are, I'm not going to say that they're famous, that some people that I, teachers and stuff that like I watch their poetry channels, and, you'll see them write a whole poem in 10 minutes. They'll be on their thing. Like the bumblebee had a striped coat, and they're just, it's whatever comes to their mind. They don't even need a complete sentence, and they just like scribble it down. And 10 minutes later, here's my piece. And I'm not going to put that down. I mean, that has value. It does. But then so does H.P. Lovecraft's work, because these 3 stanzas probably took a lot of thought, effort, and time to put it together. Now, someone who writes the other way, like I just said, like you have this thought in your mind and you just put it down, and maybe it's not even a complete sentence, and you're just kind of like free flowing it as it comes out. That's another way. But I actually feel like it is much, much, much more difficult to do what Lovecraft does, and to get it to sound good and tell a story. And I feel like people that write the freestyle kind of don't like to admit the skill that it takes to write like this. It's quite amazing. And it's very skillful. It's not that hard just to have an idea and to pop it down onto paper. But it is hard to do that. Not everybody can write like this. And sometimes I feel like people who write the other way put it down because they can't do it, and they don't want to admit that they can't. They want to act like I could do that. I could write like that. But why would I want to? It's hard. No, you can't. You can't write. You can't. No, you can't write like that. Sorry. You wish you could, and you can't. So therefore you say, oh, that style sucks. Why would anyone want to write that? I'm not even going to waste my time on that sucky, stupid style. Psh, when the truth of the matter is, it takes a lot of skill to not sound childish, to tell a story, and to write in perfect sentences using perfect grammar, a poem in traditional meter rhyming format. And I think people abandoned that because it is so difficult to do that a lot of people were having a hard time. They felt very limited by it because it is so hard to do and happen. And so the two sides, they do play off of each other, right? Because you wouldn't have the free form if you didn't feel like things used to have to be structured. And then you felt like there were certain things I wanted to say, but I couldn't say it the way I wanted to in that strict structure. And that could be the same thing with Lovecraft. Who's to say that if he wrote in free format, that we wouldn't have even more magnificent tales to be told. But he wasn't going to do that. He's never, ever, maybe he did, but he called that a short story or a novel. He's not going to write idea of what he considered poetry and what he considered bad poetry. Now, these are his ideas, not mine, because as I said before, I appreciate all, and he was quite appalled about freeform coming into existence, meaning you don't have to have any rhyme or meter. He said, of the various forms of decadence manifest in the poetical art of the present age, none strikes more harshly on our sensibilities than the alarming decline in that harmonious regularity of meter which adorned the poetry of our immediate ancestors. Then he goes on to say, the result of the lack of metrical meter cannot but be a race of churlish, cacophonous hybrids whose amorphous outcries will waver uncertainly betwixt prose and verse, absorbing the vices of both and the virtues of neither. So when H.P. Lovecraft wrote poetry, he wrote it in rhyme and in meter and was very strict about it. And that's what he saw as poetry. If he was going to write a short story, if he felt confined, like he wanted to say something more or different, but it wouldn't fit his form, then he would go ahead and make a story and just write in prose. And he didn't like to mix the two together. And he thought that that was one of the greatest mistakes that the modern poetry was making, was getting rid of having some sort of form and structure, and one has to and that would kind of like be the downfall of poetry. Some say, if we go back again to the first verse, through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber, past the wan-mooned abyss of night, I have lived o'er my lives without number. I have sounded all things with my sight, and I struggle and shriek ere the daybreak, being given to madness with fright. So here we can see that he talks about through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber. And we know that he has a series of stories called the dream cycle stories. And in them, there is a place called the Dreamlands. Now, the Dreamlands is a real place in his story, or maybe he actually thought in real life too. I don't know. Again, this is my first venture into the world of H.P. Lovecraft, but there is an actual place called the Dreamlands, and people enter this dimension through going into a state of slumber. And when they are sleeping, they enter the gates of the dreamland that's guarded by two ghouls, and you have to kind of prove yourself worthy or fight or something to gain access into the dreamlands. And then that's a whole nother world where basically anything can happen as long as you think it. Nemesis, or this creature, or whatever we're trying to figure out what it could be, says he goes through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber, past the wan-mooned abysses of night. So I have lived o'er my lives without number. I've sounded all things with my sight, and I struggle and shriek ere the daybreak, being driven to madness with fright. So whoever this character is, you can see that he's kind of immortal, and he's coming out of the dreamlands, because it says he comes through the gates out into the night. Not that he's coming in the nighttime and going into the gates, but he's coming through and into the night. So he's emerging out of the dreamlands into the actual world. Now one has to, so you think about, what is Nemesis? So a Nemesis can be an inescapable agent of someone or something's downfall, or a long-standing rival or enemy. The first stanza doesn't really give us a clue to that, but I get that it's something that is immortal and that can come in and out of that dreamlands. Now, did it originate from the dreamland? Is it some sort of creature that was imagined there and has been able to gain a certain amount of power that it can now come through into the human dimension, the human world? Which I think is a distinct possibility. So, going on to the next one. I have whirled with the earth at the dawning, when the sky was a vaporous flame. I have seen the dark universe yawning, where the black planets roll without aim, where they roll in their horror unheeded, without knowledge or luster or name. So in this stanza, you could see that he basically is an immortal kind of godlike creature, because even before there was a planet to live on, he was kind of floating around in space. So, I feel like this is kind of putting imagery of the creation of the solar system. You know, I have whirled with the earth at its dawning. And if you can think of when the clouds of gas and debris were collapsing to form our sun, and whirling dust all around started to collapse to clumps to form the various planets, and everything kind of was like beginning to swirl and move. That this creature, this Nemesis, was there. And then it says, I have drifted o'er seas without ending, under sinister gray clouded skies, that the many forked lightning is rending, that resound the hysterical cries, with the moans of invisible demons that out of the green waters rise. So again, I feel like he's just describing another period of time in which he lived, and this was the beginning of Earth, when it was kind of just, it's now solid and covered with oceans, and life was just beginning to kind of arise on it. I have plunged like a deer through the arches of the hoary primordial grove, where the oaks feel the presence that marches, and the stalks where no spirits dare rove. And I flee from a thing that surrounds me and leers through dead branches above. So I think the continents are now forming above the water mass, and you're getting plant life and maybe even some animals, because he says like a deer, that are now living on the surface of the continents, and the plants are also there. And he says, where the oaks feel the presence that marches and stalks on where no spirits dares rove. I think that's maybe talking about sunlight. If you think about it, the primordial grove would kind of be like the first forest, I think. And in order to create plant life, you need a lot of sun. And he's talking about where the oaks feel the presence that marches. And I'm feeling like maybe that's the sunlight on the tops of the canopies of the primordial grove. And he talks about and stalks on where no spirits dare rove. So at that top of the trees where the sun is hitting the trees on the tops, that no spirits go above there, that it can only go below the canopies. That's how I'm reading it. And I flee from that thing that surrounds me and leers through dead branches above. I'm thinking it's possibly sunlight. Whoever this creature is, he came out of the dreamlands at night. He comes out of the dreamlands and stalks the earth. But he doesn't have to, wherever this dreamland dimension is, doesn't necessarily have to be in Earth. It's in a different dimension, but he keeps visiting. This is how I see it. He can be in the dreamland, then come out to where Earth is, even when Earth was forming as a planet, that he could reach this dimension to where Earth was. And so he has come pre-Earth. He has come when the Earth was all oceans. He has come when plants and animals first developed on land. Then he goes into, I have stumbled by cave-ridden mountains that rise barren and bleak from the plain. I have drunk of the fog-voted fountains that ooze down to the marsh and the main. And in hot cursed tarns I have seen things I care not to gaze on again. I think this is an interesting stanza. I wonder if he's talking about humans, seeing humans for the first time. And he talks about, I've stumbled by cave-ridden mountains. And maybe this is where people first lived in caves. And he talks about ooze down to the marsh and the main. I care not to gaze on these things again. I think this is very interesting stanza because in the beginning I was saying that when I was researching him, that he was a difficult person who had a difficult personality. And one of those things were that, both of his parents died at a very young age, and he had a tendency to have vivid kind of night terrors. And these night terrors plagued him for all his life. And in one of the quotes, oh gosh, I wish I had it. He made a comment that his nightmares were so vivid and they terrorized him throughout his life so much that he could still feel, and he said, and I quote, the oozing presence of the dream. So here I think it's an interesting choice of word when he's talking about coming out of stumbling upon these dark caves and there's oozing. And I kind of wonder, given the reference to the dreamlands in the first paragraph, if he's talking about his nightmares and his terrors coming through the gateways of the dreamlands and stalking his real world. I think it could be very possible that this is what he thinks is happening, or this is what his terrors tell him, right? Or what his deepest fears are. I have scanned the vast ivy-clad palace. I have trod its untenanted hall, where the moon rising up from the valleys shows the tapestry things on the wall, strange figures discordantly woven that I cannot endure to recall. I have peered from the casements of wonder at the moldering meadows around, at the many-roofed village laid under the curse of the grave-girdled ground, and from the rows of white uncarven marble I listen intently for sound. I have haunted the tombs, so that's again the graveyards of the ages. I have flown on the pinions of fear, where the smoke-belched Erebus rages, where the jokels loom snow-clad and drear, and in realms where the sun of the desert consumes what it never can cheer. I think this is my favorite stanza, aside from the opening and closing, which are the same. And the line, he's listening for sound in the graveyard, and is an interesting line. Erebus is another name for Hades or hell. And so maybe he's in the graveyard looking for an entrance to hell. And that's why he's listening for the voices. Also, Erebus is the god of darkness. And so that's why it's also like Hades, you know. And in the realms where the sun of the desert consumes what it never can cheer. I like the way that sounds. It's like, what does that mean? You know? And I think about it, you know, and I'm thinking best way I can. That is the best way to say it. It's very, very beautiful. So Erebus is the god of darkness. And then you have the sun, which comes and consumes the darkness, because you can't cheer up the darkness. And so when you have like if you are the god of darkness, maybe you're the god of shadow, you know, and so if you're at if you're in a graveyard or at a tomb and there's a portal to hell and the god of darkness is coming out, when the sun comes and hits the darkness, well, what happens when you have shadow and you shine light on it? The shadow goes away. Then it disappears. I was old when the pharaohs first mounted the jewel-decked throne by the Nile. I was old in those epochs uncounted, when I and I only was vile, and man yet untainted and happy dwelt in a bliss on that far Arctic isle. So now I think it's interesting that it says, and man yet untainted and happy dwelt in bliss on the far Arctic isle. So is the far Arctic isle a reference possibly to Eden, and maybe this creature that's stalking, that's coming out of the darkness in the dreamlands and is kind of like hiding from light, because the light will consume anything it cannot cheer. So, and you see that in here, he's struggling at daybreak and he's shrieking with terror at the sun, and he's kind of like going to find caves and houses to go into and portals to hell to hide and you know, hiding in forests underneath canopies because he doesn't want the sun to touch him. Great was the sin of my spirit, and great is the reach of its doom. Not the pity of heaven can cheer it, nor can respite be found in the tomb. Down the infinite ions come beating in the wings of unmerciful gloom. Through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber, past the wan-mooned abyss of night, I have lived o'er my lives without number. I have sounded all things with my sight, and I struggle and I shriek ere the daybreak, being driven to madness with fright. So, who or what is the Nemesis? So I think we were making reference to possibly a Garden of Eden Satan type of vibe with the Erebus, Hades, god of darkness. And that's a possibility because we okay. So the poem ends with the same stanza that it began with. And the same line is, and I struggle and shriek ere the daybreak, being driven to madness with fright. So, who is the Nemesis? Who is the Nemesis? So, I think that on first reading and not knowing anything about the mythos surrounding H.P. Lovecraft, that one would think that the Nemesis sounds an awful lot like possibly what we would refer to Satan, who is the nemesis of humanity. But H.P. Lovecraft does have his own kind of like mythos. And so when you look through his work, he has a god called, sorry, I gotta try to pronounce this correctly, Nyarlathotep. Now, Nyarlathotep is also known as the crawling chaos or the faceless god. Now, the reason why I think this could be him is that this god character, he has thousands of different forms that he can take, and most of them are horrific and terrifying looking. And it's quite possible that he can assume any form he wishes, because he's been mentioning to be thousands of forms. So he can appear to be anything that he wants. So he could look to be like an angel or like a demon or any of these things. He doesn't really have a look of his own. He can become anything or anyone, even man. A matter of fact, when he first appears in Lovecraft's story, I can't find it right now, but I think he appears just as a man, an Egyptian pharaoh looking man who has magical objects that he is showing people and trying to get people interested in. He has superhuman strength. He can fly. He has magic. He has the ability to mentally control those around him. He is immortal and he has the power to manipulate people. This is what his strongest strength is, manipulation, and that's conniving, deceiving. And he's known to never ever be a trustworthy God. So to me, that does sound a lot like what people would just call Satan. But H.P. Lovecraft had stated that this god, Nyarlathotep, was actually a god that he dreamed of, and that he commonly had night terrors dreaming of, and this as a child, that he had dreamed of this god and this character, and it had terrified him so much that obviously when he grew older, he wrote, stories that surrounded this god and the dreamlands. And then obviously this poem was also a creation of him coping with the terrors in his dreams that he had, and he told these stories in a way to cope with what was really terrorizing him. And I feel like, as always, thank you for listening. If you have any suggestions for where I should start in the H.P. Lovecraft world, please give a comment below. If you have any other poems or short stories that you would like me to discuss on this channel, you can go ahead and write it in the comments below, or you can write me directly at wendy@experimentsinpoetry.com.